Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. Ruben at To Readers It May Concern was gracious enough to tag me in the Read Smart tag. Now this tag was invented by Emily at Prose and Petticoats, sort of in conjunction, I guess, with Ruben, or at least both he and she released videos of their versions of the tag simultaneously, probably about a week ago now. My production schedule has gotten all out of whack. Actually, my priorities have shifted a little bit, and I'm trying to actually prioritize reading above other things in my life, and it's not always possible to do. And as Michael K. Vaughan said the other day, something has to give, and in some cases what has to give is the filming of videos. I also am heartened by something I remember the physicist Richard Feynman having said. Now, he was given a portrait in a television show. I think it was a BBC broadcast initially, called The Pleasure of Finding Things Out, something like that. Edited into about an hour's worth of interviews. And one thing he said was that while he took his academic job teaching, was it Caltech? I can't remember where he taught, but he would often be approached to assist the school in administrative functions and so forth. And he came up with the philosophy of let George do it. That was how he phrased it. He would be actively irresponsible, he said. And to a degree, I think I am adopting that philosophy. As far as BookTube, I am going to be actively irresponsible. That means I'm watching less, and when I do watch, I am being less diligent about commenting. I am still watching a fair amount of BookTube, and I am also being just less diligent about everything. And I've been tagged a number of times, and I'm going to try to get through them. I was tagged by Renee at Beyond Books, a very nice channel, and alas, I had already previously done that tag, so I failed to respond to that, and now I doubt that I could find it again. I mean, I don't like being irresponsible, but I am also just not very together. So I will do what I can. The videos by Ruben and Emily, you will see, are both very didactic, very instructional in their format. Becoming a better reader is something which I am invested in. It's something I hope to do, but I have not achieved anywhere near the level of concentration that I would like. I am thinking that Steve Donahue did this video as well, and I will refer you to his video. He, of course, is in a very different circumstance to almost all the rest of us. He has a laser sharp focus, and so when he sits down to read, it's just a matter of doing so. He does not have his distractions in the room, and he zips right through. And I think he sets a goal for many of us to aspire to. He sets an impossible standard for most of us, because he operates under the condition of not needing sleep, and most of us do need sleep. I'm exaggerating a little bit there, but that's how it is, roughly speaking. So there are a number of questions in this tag. And as I say, I cannot answer any of this in a prescriptive sort of way. At best, I can perhaps tell you something that worked for me. Now, I don't know what number it will come up under, but Ruben said that he makes a habit of reading in the morning because that's when he is sort of refreshed, and it also sets the tone for his day. And some while ago, I came to a similar conclusion that I was best committing myself to an hour's worth of reading in the morning if I can do that. And I have done that pretty regularly. Lately, I've been a little bit more dissolute about it. As you read, I am finding that you can make a hard and fast rule, but sometimes there has to be give and take, and you have to make exceptions. So, for example, overall, I try not to leave a book unfinished that I have started, and I left Les Miserables by Victor Hugo unfinished. I read about 300 pages and abandoned that book. That's something I have not done in the past 2.5 years or so of reading. I have not abandoned any book but for that. And in that case, making the exception to the rule was the right thing. And so similarly, in this case, I try to read that hour in the morning, but lately, just the way things are going in real life, I've made an exception again, and hope that my diligent practice the rest of the day will sort of carry me through. And so far, I've been doing okay. So number one, what is your strategy to stay focused and engaged while reading? I don't have a real good strategy. That is my number one problem, and that is what I am hoping to build up on, but I don't beyond, as I say, that hour in the morning if I can wake up early enough, because once the whole household is awake here, then it becomes much more difficult to keep the focus on a book. So oftentimes advisors will say, well, shut off your social media, put it out of earshot, don't receive notifications, that kind of thing. Well, I don't worry about a lot of that because nobody's really notifying me about anything all that critical anyhow. And God forbid somebody should call me. If somebody calls me, it probably is worth my interrupting the book I'm reading and taking that call. But it doesn't happen that much. But once the household arises and there are other members of the family about, then a social media account will be open within earshot, and I will be hearing various memes and all kinds of the soundtrack to various cat and bird videos and that sort of thing, and it's very hard for me to tune that out. So early hours for me work best, but I don't really have, Steve talked about how he has such a good focus that people will even come up to him and he won't even be aware of their presence, and they'll have to go like this in front of his eyes before he acknowledges them. That is not an unusual phenomenon in the old world. Of course, the most famous example of that I can think of is Dante. And when I was young, I had a better focus like that. As I've gotten older, I have less of a focus. But I live in a very active household. So my strategy, though, is if I can't get that hour in, it's just really to snag those moments when it does seem a little bit peaceable, a peaceable kingdom for a moment, and monopolize those for reading. Now, in this case, I'm making a video, so that this is going to set me back on my goals. So I have numerous tags, and I thought, well, I could just knock them out. But after I make this, I think I will turn off the camera and continue with my reading. Number 2, how does your environment influence your focus, and what can you do to optimize it? Well, that's basically what it is. I can't do anything about my environment, and I wouldn't want to. I am very happy with my environment, and having to give up on a certain amount of reading is, I want to say, de rigueur to living this sort of life. Ultimately, I forget now who it was that wrote and said, the main thing that most works of literature are trying to teach you, I'm saying philosophy, or wise literature, works of wisdom, is that you should put down the book and deal with the real world and with life. Life itself is more pressing of your concern than any book that you might be reading. And I do believe that. Of course, the analogy there is the Bruce Lee line, which I think I've made mention of. It is like a finger pointing to the moon. But don't look at the finger, or you will miss out on all that heavenly glory. So ultimately, I think the idea of shedding all these books seems feasible to me. But for the time being, I have not reached that kind of stage of enlightenment, let us say, and so I do have reading goals. I do want to read more. I would like to become a well-read individual, and I do actually enjoy the activity of reading, so there's no disparity there between those two functions, or those two desires. Number 3, what methods do you use to retain and recall information from what you've read? Well, I don't. The exception is if I'm reading to a particular purpose, meaning I'm reading for the sake of something that I'm planning to write. And that can be twofold. That can be either, say, a play that I intend to write and I need historical background, I need to jot down notes of facts that may be pertinent. And then similarly, if I'm writing some kind of a prose essay, which I don't think I do anymore and have no likelihood of doing, I don't expect to be writing any historical plays either. But that kind of reading, then you kind of know what sort of bits of information you need, or you mark up the book. And with little, I hesitate to scribble in a book, but put little tabbies or whatever you have so that you, but that's more so that you can refer back to it. As far as retaining what I read, that's always been a problem for me. I knew even in high school that I had very little memory at all, and it caused problems for certain types of tests that the teachers would ask us to take. Somehow I managed to get through it. This absence of memory is concomitant to the role of poetry in my life. One of the most important functions of poetry is the retention of information. So you read Thomas Aquinas and you may not remember any of that, but you come across the exact same thing translated into Dante's Terza Rima, and you may recall some of that better. So that's one of the things that poetry does, is sift through information for the sake of its retention. That can be great deeds of heroes. all sorts of things. And so with that, the other aspect to that, unlike, say, when you're writing a historical play, for the sake of poetry, you have absolutely no idea in advance which piece of information might be important to you. And so when you are at work on a poem or something like that, you just hope that something is in there and it pops out when you need it. And for the most part, that has been how it worked for me. I no longer write poetry actively. It's not to say I have turned my back on the muse wholeheartedly or snubbed the muse. I would not do that. God forbid I should do such a thing. But I think I have been largely relieved of my duties as a writer of poetry. But unless you are reading for some narrow purpose, you have no way of knowing what kind of aspect to the information you're going to need, what you might need to retrieve. And unless you are blessed with a prodigious memory and recall, I don't think anybody can be 100%. And so, I mean, there are methods that a person can use to train themselves. And because I was primarily a poet, I disavowed those methods. I had a friend who read the book, The Memory Palace of Matteo Ricci, and taught himself the method whereby you create an edifice, a building, a room, and different objects in the room, and you remember everything. And by gosh, it worked. He was able to remember everything. But in terms of being a writer of poetry, that would only have hampered me, I think. So I, as I say, disavowed that kind of practice. Along with that, I'm not really even sure how important it is to retain things. So I have just read, I have finished, but for the second appendix, The Fall of Constantinople by Stephen Runciman. And that's a pretty straightforward and pared down narrative. I will probably remember a lot of that, but the first couple of chapters give you a lot of introductory background with a plethora of names and places, and the majority of that I can't recollect. It will all go away. It's information that I probably don't need to know. If I come across some of that in another context, in another book, then maybe some of it will stick. It's a good reason to have the book handy so that if I do come across a name and say, oh, I remember that, then I can look it up and try to find it. It's a reason to have a nice index in a book, which books of this sort used to have. I think nowadays you find a lot more books that will just forego the index or forego the bibliography. Number 4, how do you approach difficult or challenging material? I think Steve Donahue had some good points about that. I think he basically said he doesn't really make the distinction, and I think it's probably good with that. I mean, material can be challenging in different ways. And so for me, the biggest challenge is if something is poorly written. And I try not to read things that are poorly written, but since becoming a booktuber and since becoming a person whose primary hobby is reading, I have tried to open myself more to reading bad prose. It was something I stayed away from in the past because I was a very poor reader, a very slow reader, and I knew that I could not corrupt myself with a lot of bad verbiage in the noggin. I'm trying to read more of that, but I can't always sustain that. It is one of the things that I would like to increase my ability to do. I think, again, using Steve Donahue as a reference point, there's absolutely no reason, say, I'm reading this book, and it's taken me a while to get through, but I say that any book that I read, I am automatically introduced to 4 other books that I would like to read, that I would like to look at. And I am hampered in that because, as you can guess, it expands my would-be TBR exponentially. So the numbers of things that I need or might need to read just increases and expands. And if I were in the position where I could take a book like this, just a regular sized book, and just blow through it in an evening, which I think is entirely possible. Plenty of people do that. That would really help put me where I would like to be. And some of that, for example, Braiding Sweetgrass. That was a book that was somewhat uneven. The prose sometimes rose to the heights and sometimes was rather clunky or cliched, I think would be the word. And it would be nice to be able to take a book like that and just blow through it and be done with it. I am not anywhere near that, but it would help me along. Now, so there's that kind of difficulty. Then there's the difficulty of not understanding something. So I've pointed them out. History of Greek mathematics. It's a 2-volume set published by Dover, edited by, I think, Thomas, possibly even Sir Thomas. I may be wrong with the first name. The last name is Heath. And I would like to read that. At my current level, I can't afford the time for it. But it's the kind of thing I would be unlikely to follow all of the math explanations. And in that kind of case, it would not bother me. I am okay with letting my lack of understanding what I am reading just roll over me. It does not disturb me at all. Something like Finley, Moses Finley, the first time I approached his writing, you bet there was a lot that I didn't understand. He was my first introduction to the reading of history, and it required multiple reads, and over time, by osmosis, as people like to say, some of it has sunk in. In fact, in conjunction to what Steve had said about, and I don't remember what Steve said, I tend not to remember things. He mentioned in this book is a collection of essays, and maybe I will even read a little bit at the end of this video. The last piece is called The Heritage of Isocrates, jumping into the whole question of whither higher education that was bandied about much at the time. And he mentions, of course, F.R. Leavis and other important thinkers on the topic, T.S. Eliot. It's really a marvelous essay, The Heritage of Isocrates, and it does exist online somewhere because I have seen it, but I recommend the whole book. But one little digression that has stuck in my mind was he said something to the effect, and I will read that to you, that people talk about reading something in depth, and usually, more often than not, what they mean is reading something in greater detail. So reading something in depth or talking about some book that you're reading as being very deep, that for the most part, I think is illusion. It's not that one book is more deep than another. Some people think literature is very deep. And then when you actually pick open one of those Penguin classics and read it, you come to find out, no, it's just a book like any other book. So that, that whole intimidation factor need not apply. But as with the old adage, you only fear what you do not know, so with reading, you tend to fear what you do not know. When you actually get in there and you look at the text on the page, it becomes much less intimidating. So I always felt that all of this need or supposed need for mediators to texts was, I want to say nonsensical, but not necessarily so. Sometimes a good mediator is helpful, but the church fathers were very keen on making sure that nobody learned Latin because they wanted to be the exclusive purveyors of those texts to the lay people. For the most part, I have always tried to go directly to the source of anything. In my case, of course, I cannot go to the original Greek of the Bible or whatever, the Hebrew, but then try to go to the original text itself by hopefully a good translator, as opposed to endlessly reading what somebody else has to say about it. Now, sometimes somebody has good things to say about things, and they're very worthwhile to read. So basically, I don't recall what I read. I would like to improve my retention, but I am not going to do it by any sort of gimmick. I think the best thing to do is to improve my focus. And of course, I think a couple of people have mentioned this. I think Steve said something to the effect, and Ruben did as well, that you should try to engage with the text also. So that means when you are reading it, you are not just passively receiving, as you might a movie. If you need to stop, you can stop and think about it. Brian at Bookish has talked about that one of his favorite things is to lay the book down and let his imagination go off into its flight of fancy. And I have, of course, always done that. That will not gain you any points as far as your speed total. But there again, speed should not be the factor in your effort to improve your reading, I believe, although all of us seem to want that. But as far as my life as a poet, had I put the kibosh on those flights of fancy and gotten through the book in 2 hours, as opposed to 14 days, it would have killed that whole creative facet to my being. So there are trade-offs with what you do. I now am at a point in life where I do not expect to be doing anything like that, and just the mere passive processing of information is something that I think I could tolerate. The one thing that Steve never talks about when it comes to that intense focus which he brings to any work of writing is that you have to yourself be pretty clear inside. You have to be pretty stable. You have to not have a lot of internal distractions going on. And many of us, just because of the conditions under which we were raised, cannot avoid having those voices popping into our head or whatnot. With the cessation of my poetry writing career, I believe I have reached a level where I have much less chatter going on in my mind, and so I believe I can keep working towards a goal of increasing my speed, just increasing my focus, though, primarily. And that's not to say I have reached or expect to reach a Sadguru level of enlightenment. But for the time being, as a person who has been affiliated with books, God knows, I've written plenty of them. For the majority of my life, my adult life particularly, I have come across so many things, works that have piqued my curiosity, bits of information, and I have wanted to learn more about them. Curiosity is endless. My ability to act upon that curiosity has very finite limitations. So it's interesting in this because I was raised without any geography. We did not cover that in school. And so any work of history like this, just getting that down is hard. When I read Gibbon, Edward Gibbon, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, that hampered me not a little bit. But when you get involved in literature, you find that the geography of Constantinople, Istanbul, that area, it crops up in all kinds of literature. And if you're reading a poem by Lord Byron, it may not be vital for you to look it up at that time. And even if you do look it up, you are not likely to retain it, at least if you are somebody with the meager grasping abilities as myself. But over time, and with repeated exposure, you do pick up more. So while I was still, and would still be tomorrow, largely lost when it comes to all of the rivers in Europe, which Gibbon was constantly making reference to, I have the geography of this down pretty well, but it's taken me a long time to get here. So it was a smooth read for me. I think this would be a great book for a novice to begin the reading of history with, but the first couple of chapters would be hard, and if you don't have the geography down well, that will be an added burden to you. For me, in this case, it worked out very nicely. One wishes one had a good education, but of course, and in fact, Finley mentions some of that. There is also this thought, the more highly educated one is, the more one is schooled in conformity. Most likely. Not necessarily, but most likely. Number 5, what role do note-taking and annotation play in your reading process? Almost none. Now, if you've watched this channel, you've seen a couple of times where I was not happy with a book and I just decided to mark the hell out of the book and scribble under things that I hated, a phrase that annoyed me or a duplication. I think Steve talked about it, maybe not in this video, but another one. You read a book and it's like this, and they use a phrase, and then the exact same phrase is used again 300 pages later with no kind of mention, no kind of correlation to the previous thing. That was the thing that I found really annoying in the Dawn of Everything by Davids Wengrow and Graeber. If you are reading and you have some sort of ear to linguistics and some sort of focus, you should at least be picking up on those kinds of cues. And they do signal that something may not be as well put together as it should be. Oftentimes, too many cooks can spoil a broth, so to speak. So I do not take any notes, but in the case of absolute annoyance with little persnickety bits, I scribbled, and that is also a way of engaging with a text. I allowed myself I was going to say largesse of mutilating the book with underlines and stars and stuff because I did not like the text. I was disgruntled with the text. But and people's annotations can be very good to the historian, to be sure. So I am not urging you not to do so. But for myself, I do not like to read a text that's all marked up, and I prefer not to mark up a text myself, because some people, I think even Reuben does this, he will underline things in the book. And for me, number one, it's very unlikely I'm going to return to the book. But if I do, when I have done that, and in the past I did, what I marked up, generally I had no clue why I marked it up. If a book is good, you are going to most likely get something else out of it on a reread than you got the first time. Number 6, how do you balance reading for pleasure with reading for personal or professional development? Well, there is no reading for professional development, and I see no conflict between pleasure and personal development. It all fulfills that function. For me, I'm always trying to find out more about the world, so it always adds to that. And there is a pleasure, as again, to quote that Richard Feynman title, The Pleasure in Finding Things Out. So there's not a dichotomy, so to speak. Number 7, what is the importance of setting reading goals? Well, it depends again what kind of reading goal you have. I don't place a lot of store by it. I don't think that, say somebody will set a goal, I want to read, well, I'll use a popular one from BookTube. Numerous people are doing this. I want to read every single book by Stephen King. I don't think that that kind of goal will really get you anything other than the pleasure of accomplishing that goal. It may be fun to do. Heidi at My Reading Life has all kinds of neat annotations where she records what books come in. She has her TBR, her to be read pile. She has an ancient TBR, which I think finished up not that long ago. But she really gets pleasure out of doing that, and that is wonderful. But if you don't get pleasure out of setting a kind of goal, and I will even go so far as to say an artificial goal like that, and then achieving it, then you don't need to do it if you don't like. And so for myself, I've never found that very important. I don't set a lot of store by goals. But it is, say I pick up a 3-volume set by Stephen Runciman or by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, as I did last year. Well, my goal is, at the start, to try to get through all 3 volumes, to try to read the whole thing. I mean, that's my goal. I had the goal of trying to read all of Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and I failed in that goal. And I realize in that case the goal may well have been misapplied. But other than that, I'm trying to think of what goals I might have. I am no longer in a position where I need to retain something professionally. Not that I ever much was. Well, I'm not sure. So reading goals, the goal of, say, trying to focus more, that's a good goal. But again, that's a goal that only can occur in the practice. It's not something that really works as a standalone goal that you could put on a list of goals. And number 8, what are some strategies for overcoming reading slumps or lack of motivation? And that, of course, I fell into that after I aborted Les Miserables. I fell into a drastic reading slump for about 2-3 weeks, which I have not had happen to me in 2.5 years while I've been dedicating myself to reading. And I was a bit worried. And I think I had been all gung-ho about reading big works, and I was hoping to just plow through some big novels one after the other, and I just threw that out, and I just allowed myself to go where my pleasure took me. Smaller works. There is nothing wrong with reading a 40-page novel just to bolster your spirits. And so I think that was partly what I did. But I would say in the bigger picture, in my years as a writer, people would often talk about writer's block, or I don't have the motivation. What does it say particularly? Reading slumps or lack of motivation. In the writing field, of course, I never was bothered by that. If I didn't feel like writing, then I wouldn't write. And if I had no motivation, then I wouldn't write. It was very easily taken care of, that sort of problem. And I think also that the same thing probably can apply to reading as well. If you lack the motivation to read, then just don't read. Go do something else. I don't think it's a big problem. So that is the end of the Read Smart tag. Thank you, Ruben, for tagging me, and thank you, Emily, for creating this tag. Now, I heard somewhere that there was a part 2 supposed to be in the works, so I am looking forward to part 2. I will, of course, put links to these videos in the description box below. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.